Channel, AS. My dearest brothers and sisters, this is Ashta speaking. I greet you in peace and love. I deeply empathize with the people of Earth, and I understand that your suffering is currently too much. We have stepped up our covert actions and are sending the maximum amount of energy to Earth that we think you can handle. You may be noticing that the energies are very intense and electrifying right now. Humanity is undergoing a profound transformation right now on a deep, subtle, energetic level. It is still likely but not guaranteed that your lives will substantially improve and you will physically meet us in 2024 or 2025. I wish you could see how much of a positive impact you are making. It is likely much more than you are consciously aware of, and I would love for you to feel glad and emboldened and feel that your life has meaning because indeed, it does. Hopefully after we have landed, we can show you how much of an impact you have made, even energetically just by being on Earth. Today I feel privileged that I can give you another message. As with the previous two messages, my hope is that this will give you tools with which you can reduce your suffering. Because you can't avoid pain, but with enough spiritual growth and perspective you can avoid suffering. I invite you to imagine a cat that is depressed because some other cats are thinking thoughts that it disagrees with. Or imagine a cat that is angry because other cats aren't developing their awareness quickly enough. Or imagine a cat that is anxious because for years now it is primarily focused on hoping that a certain future will manifest, and it is waiting for that future to manifest. Wouldn't you think there is almost something wrong with that cat, that it is almost mentally ill? You might think, you're a cat. All these thought patterns and preoccupations don't actually help you. Just go and be in the moment. Do what is needed to maintain your body and your life, and then go and lie in the sun somewhere, or go play, or do whatever you want. Well, while you are certainly more developed than cats, I mostly feel the same way about the vehicles or lower selves of Earth humans, namely your mind, body, and emotions. Ultimately your soul is the one making the big decisions, and ultimately your soul is safe and can't fail here on Earth regardless. And also, your lower self has very little control over when us galactics will actually land. So there's no point to your mind being so stressed out and worried and always being preoccupied with the future. The point of your mind isn't to be worried and anxious all the time. It isn't even to maximize pleasure and your lifespan, or minimize pain and risk. The point of your mind is to experience the world and learn lessons and possibly be of service. So go and do that instead of worrying about the state of the world so much. Earth humans engage in all kinds of behaviors and thoughts patterns that either aren't useful at all, or that only become useful at a significantly higher level of consciousness than even the average spiritual person is. Section, thoughts you might not want to go into. For example, judging other people isn't useful. You haven't lived their life, so how can you possibly judge them? Giving people unsolicited advice isn't useful, unless you have listened to them extensively first, far more than most people do, and have offered them plenty of appreciation and love first, far more than most people do. Pushing one side of some culture war or political issue isn't useful, if you do that with the attitude that your side is 100% right and the other side is 100% wrong. While certainly one side might be more right than the other, issues don't become permanent battlegrounds if both sides don't have at least some valid points or unaddressed concerns. So, if you want to engage in culture war or political issues at all, then first raise your level of consciousness until you can genuinely see both perspectives and can see the flaws and unaddressed concerns that both camps have. Extensively studying politics isn't useful, except if your calling is to do something with politics, and even then I would consider raising your level of consciousness first and doing something with politics second. That said, learning about politics a bit is fine, because that helps you with understanding the world you live in. Excessively studying intel or alt-media news or speculating when things might change also isn't useful. It's good to know how the world works in broad strokes, but ultimately it doesn't benefit you to know every detail about things that you have no control over anyway. And spending excessive time wondering when the galactics will land just means you're not living in the present. Worrying about the state of the world isn't useful, because the actual you, your reincarnating soul, can't be harmed. Not to mention that just being upset about the situation in, for example, Palestine, without doing anything about it, doesn't actually help anyone. For most people, I would recommend focusing mainly inwards, with some attention paid to the external world but not too much. Even if your ultimate goal is to improve the outside world, focusing inwards first makes you far more effective at improving the outside world. Next up, criticizing someone or telling someone they're wrong or publicly disagreeing with someone is useful in certain situations, however most people do that far more often than would be beneficial. Chasing pleasure and avoiding pain can be useful to an extent, because it can point to things that you need to have a more functional life, or things that you need to avoid so that you can continue to have experiences here on Earth. Meeting your needs is a valid practice. At the same time, most people are too focused on chasing pleasure and avoiding pain, when those things are ultimately just experiences. It's possible to just observe that you have pain, without going into it. Having all kinds of ideas about how you or how your life or how the world should be probably isn't useful, because your mind really doesn't have nearly enough information to evaluate these things. If you have resistance to how your life is or how the world is, then it's entirely possible that your soul wants you to have precisely that life or be in a world that is in that state, so that you can learn critical lessons and release your resistance to it. Yes, I know it's hard, but being confronted with things you're in resistance to is exactly how you overcome that resistance. Having ideas that other people should do certain things, whether that's your friend, or whether that's galactics or grey hats intervening, isn't very useful, because other people have free will. Also, worrying about things that are outside your control isn't very useful. Victim consciousness isn't useful. Labeling huge groups of people as being uniformly bad or uniformly good or uniformly as victims isn't useful. Trying to avoid things can be practically necessary in some cases. Your vehicle is still a physical body. However, sometimes it's a form of resistance, where people try to avoid something unpleasant that's nevertheless beneficial, or that their soul wants in order to learn certain lessons. In fact, if you're in resistance to something or are strongly judging something, then that thing happening to you or that thing happening on Earth may exactly be what you need to learn your lesson and overcome your resistance. So as you can see, the average person has a huge amount of thought patterns and judgments and labels that don't actually benefit them. Section: Labels and Meanings. I invite you to be conscious of labels that you attach to people. Is that person actually a jerk, or is he just having a really bad day, or is something awful going on in his life? Is that anti-immigration person actually a racist? Is that left-winger actually just a hypocritical virtue signaler? Are you sure about these things, or is it just easy and pleasing to the ego to label others in a negative way? Also, I invite you to be conscious of the meanings that you give to things. If someone doesn't call you back, then yes, it's possible that they secretly don't like you, but perhaps they were just busy and forgot. And yes, perhaps right now your life isn't fun, and I empathize, but that doesn't mean that you failed, or that your life will always suck, or that you are not good enough, or something like that. Giving a careless meaning to something is how you turn pain into suffering. Since recently, this channeler has been having deep and satisfying meditations. This channeler is feeling that even in the very unlikely case that us galactics never showed up, even if he would never be in a relationship again, then he can still have a worthwhile and reasonably happy life just by meditating every day and focusing on his spiritual growth. And the channeler realized that this was entirely inside his control, because all he needs to do is just sit down and meditate. There is still pain in the channeler's life, but at this moment there is no suffering. This is an example of the kind of attitude that makes someone's soul go, okay, lessons have been learned, there is no need anymore to live in a dark, tough world. And indeed, the channeler has had the opportunity in this lifetime to individually ascend and leave his body. He chose not to because he wanted to remain on Earth and keep helping others and being of service. Conversely, back when the channeler still felt that his happiness and well-being depended primarily on others, his soul felt that there were still lessons to be learned on Earth. Anyone who feels that they primarily depend on others for their happiness or well-being, probably are exactly where they need to be, because their soul probably wants them to learn some more lessons on earth. While the people who have learned their earth lessons are the kind of people who are mostly fine and mostly at peace with being on earth right now, in a deep way, where all of their inner parts are aligned to that. So it's not just the surface level, look at my life being amazing while some forgotten inner part is screaming on the inside. Yes, I understand that genuinely reaching inner peace, with all inner parts being aligned to it, is really hard. Later in this message I will share a practice that I think is great for spiritual development.